Welcome back, everyone. This is Unspoken, Community and Business Conversations. If you're tuning in for the first time, this is part 1, episode 2 of our Impact series, where we've interviewed 10 Cleveland entrepreneurs and captured their experiences with battling systemic racism.
Now, systemic racism, it's everywhere. It's truly everywhere. It can be something as trivial as just walking down your neighborhood and someone saying you're in the wrong place. Then it can be as complex as, applying for a job and then the algorithm using recruiter bias to actually remove you from the shortlist. And then also, just having your name being different, a loan officer can just say, no, this person doesn't fit into the box of who they like to give loans to.
Yeah, all real. It's amazing how differently it shows up depending on your background, your education, your environments. Let's take a look at what our entrepreneurs had to say.
The way that I identify systemic racism is by not just looking at the symptoms of problems. I feel like in society we spend so much time with the outward and the easy, low-hanging fruits of issues that we see in our community. For example, we have this conversation about violence. Well, violence is a symptom of a root issue. The root issue is systemic racism. The root issue is poverty. There's so much data that shows the correlation between violence and poverty. And if we would do the things necessary to solve the root issues, then we would see the improvement of the symptoms. And so when I think about systemic racism, it is literally about how do we have conversations about root issues and not the easy things that really, in my opinion, are fluff. While they may be very damaging, they're very impactful, they still are not the actual problem themselves. We got to fix the root issues, and systemic racism is found in the root causes.
Racism and white supremacy are all around us, and we're all victims of it, black, white, brown. And it's what we are trying to wrestle with in our work. We experience it every day. We're 2 Black business owners. I'm a Black female. So we're constantly dealing with the impacts of racism and white supremacy while also trying to fight it, which can be, kind of exhausting, but also energizing, because this is usually something I say towards the end of a conversation, but we are, and I am very inspired by the reality that we ended chattel slavery in America, for the most part. But we at least ended the kind of big system or institution of it. And when you strip out the bigotry, which is hard to do, and the hatred and the kind of mean acts, and the atrocity of it, it was about business. It was about money. So any business owner knows that your biggest cost is labor. You can make a lot more money if you don't have to pay labor costs. And the institution of slavery was that, right? It was a heinous institution where people were not treated as people. However, it was an enormous business incentive for everybody to keep the institution in place, not just slave owners, but the beneficiaries of what slavery provided for America. And our country was built on free labor, right? So we can kind of romanticize our country's history as much as we'd like, and have disputes about what the Civil War was over and all of these sorts of things. But at its core, it was an incredible business proposition that no other country in the world had innovated on in the way that we did here in America. And so there was just not an incentive to get rid of it.
I identify systemic racism as systems that have their roots in racism, which I would say from the founding of this country, Black people were not considered human and women had absolutely no rights. And because of that foundation, the systems that we have in place are manifestations of those foundational principles and those foundational truths of the state in which our country was founded. And so what we are witnessing today is just what the system intended. And so I don't believe in systems change. I believe in systems being replaced. I believe in systems being reconfigured in order to accommodate everyone. because systems in actuality don't work for anyone, including white people. It's just that people of color fare worse and Black people fare the worst in systems.
It shows up everywhere. You know what I'm saying? You know, Michelle Obama just said at the DNC, you know, there's no vaccine for systemic racism. You know, there's no vaccine for racism. And how I've always looked at racism is definitely a virus. You know, it's much different from something that's like bacterial. So I'm going into like my sex educator world back in my Planned Parenthood days. But, you know, if you had a STI, a sexually transmitted infection, you would use some type of antibiotics to cure that. But if you have a sexually transmitted virus, something like herpes, something like hepatitis, something like HIV or AIDS, that lives in your body whether you want it to be there or not. Can it be taken care of? Yes. But will it ever go away? No. We have to be able to look at systemic racism as a virus, something that can be managed, but something that's never going to disappear. So all of us, whether we are Black and dealing with internalized oppression and in our own internalized racism, and I think that's pretty much where a lot of my issues live, is like thinking myself out of opportunities because I feel like the answer is going to be no anyway. So that's really how systemic racism starts off showing up for me. But there's also the intersectionality piece, which means me as a Black, queer, bisexual, non-binary person, there's always going to be a door in my face because I'm too much or not enough for somebody. You know, it's really, really good when you check off all their boxes, like, oh, this is for Black people. Oh, this is for women. Oh, this is for poor folks. Oh, this is for this is for that. They want you to be able to, you know, have you in all of their materials for promotion, but they're not willing to really divest from white supremacy in the ways that they need to divest from white supremacy to really show up for you as a business or as an entity. And so, you know, first and foremost, systemic racism really is an internalized oppression experience. Me really grappling with imposter syndrome, that whole idea of us having to be twice as good to be seen as half worthy of anything. That's literally what systemic racism looks like. It means us working ourselves to death and not really making room for us to rest.
Systemic racism has played a part in the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. You know, for the most part, when we talk about mental health in this country, I would argue about over 90% of the people that we would go to talk to about mental health don't look like us. I would also argue 90% of the people that talk about mental health at the time that I was talking about it when I first started didn't look like us either. That is primarily due to the fact that, you know, looking at mental health or talking to a therapist can be perceived as a luxury. And that's what the white folks do. That's not something that we as Black people can afford or are in a position to do. Why is that? So part of it is lack of knowledge on what mental illness is, how common it is, but also white supremacy. White supremacy is what tells us we can't cry in public. We can't, as men, we can't show emotion because we have to be strong. All the stuff that we go through on a daily basis, we got to be strong for our family, for our wives, for our spouses, whoever, and we can't, because if it's a sign of weakness, then when the uprising happens, you know, we're going to be the ones that fall or whatever the case may be. Again, we're so preoccupied with how others look at us, how white men or white people look at us, that we feel like you can't be weak, you can't show an emotion, when in reality, that's the most human thing that we can do is show emotion.
Honestly, from the outset, because again, we're a company whose main value is rooted in racial equity and racial inclusion as an aspiration. And I say as an aspiration because we don't know what racial equity or racial inclusion looks like in America. We've never experienced that. So that's the goal. What we have experienced is centuries of race-based oppression and white supremacy, and again, a caste system, which I'll next interview be able to say more about more intelligently. But like, I think back to the first question, that's what makes our business interesting, not necessarily, and complex, is that we are trying to move people towards a thing that they've never seen and that we as a country have never experienced, but that people say that they want, and have never had to be very specific about what it would mean to get there, or what ways their own behavior would have to change and what ways other people's behavior would have to change. And, we haven't had to be very specific about our quest for racial equity or racial inclusion or racial justice in America. We're not very specific about what the change is. And usually the change isn't about power, which we think is at the core of white supremacy and racism. We don't talk about power a lot. We don't talk about it in specific ways. We kind of talk around it in ways that are not helpful, because I believe strongly you can't fix what you don't acknowledge, right? Like what you don't kind of shine a light on. And so that's our work. So racism, again, has impacted our work and our business from the outset, because it's the muse of what we're trying to like reform in a lot of ways.
So systemic racism absolutely impacts Black business owners. Our systems of capitalism are built off of being able to have access to resources. So whether that's, you have seeds and you have land and you can grow something and you have water and people can buy it from you. Or in today's society, it's a knowledge economy. So you've been provided with access to an education, and as a result of that, you can build tools and apps and things that allow you to expand your, financial wherewithal. So when I think about Black business owners, we're often starting at a disadvantage. We don't have those resources. And I would say white, individuals sometimes don't have the resources, but they have better access to individuals that do have resources and can assist them, and oftentimes believe that if they decide to share their resources with another white colleague, that they're likely to get the return that they're looking for. And so I think systemic racism, we see it prevalent in the way Black businesses have to survive, because we don't get the benefit of doubt. We don't get that trust factor that says, I'm going to take a chance on Danielle, and I believe that this is a good investment. If we do get support, it's often from a place of charity, which is very limiting. When I think about a charitable contribution, that's not money I'm expecting to get back. That's money I'm giving away to hopefully you do the right thing with it. When someone decides to invest in you, investment means I expect some sort of return. And so we just need people to believe that investing in Black people is the right thing to do and is a very profitable thing to do. And so as a business owner, I'm very new in this particular portion of my entrepreneurial journey. And so what I see is just knowing that every time I go into the room, I have to wonder, am I asking for enough? Do I ask for too much and then they say, no, they're not going to take the project? Or will they tell me like, nah, we have budgeted way more than that. Like, you didn't ask for enough. And so those are the things that I'm really grappling with when I think about systemic racism, because I have to come into the scenario as if I have it all figured out. I don't really have the room to act as if I'm still developing and growing my practice.
Systemic racism has played a huge part in not even just how I view business or how I view communities, but along with my family and my friends. So when you think about just the lack of investment in East Cleveland, and what that does for generations and generations, to where many people are just thinking like, this is just the way of life, this is just what it is, and not really having that inspiration or that aspiration to say, how can we be able to shift some things? And so when you ride down the street and you see abandoned homes, abandoned buildings, and then you just step 500 feet further and then you just see sprawling universities, museums, hospital systems, it begins to have you think about, what happened here. And so those are just some of the ways that I see that systemic racism has played that part, and what it has done to the mentality of people, whether they're on this side or that side. Like you see it and you experience it.
I wanted to grow my brand into a better location, which was Legacy Village,
And I tried to get in and they didn't return my phone calls. I went to an appointment. They were dry, and I never ended up with a location. And they actually ended up telling me that it would be a conflict of interest because they had another salon that was there at the time. I think it was Ladies and Gentlemen is still there. But I find that odd because now they have another salon there now.
Well, with the Lotus Lounge business, it's like, so basically they didn't want at the point in time they didn't want black owners in the flats. So basically, we had to go through a lot to just to even get the permits to open up. So we had paid for like the liquor license and obviously paid for the lease and everything like that. But when it got time to go to City Hall, we then had to have the mayor come in there to basically vouch on our behalf to get the project rolling. And once we got the project open, then the neighbors next door, they were the main issue. They're the main issue now. Yeah, so if you ever want to go to the Flatiron, don't go.
We've had support in every area from black and white. They've all been a blessing to us. We've learned how to work with Caucasians, and then there's a whole different lane that you work with black people. Unfortunately, black people want a discount with everything. They think that they're supposed to get a discount, some shortcut, can we barter? And in lanes there, we can't do that. But in times when I have to pay my light, my gas, and things like that, you're gonna pay that tab with exactly what you see there. But I have to say that I learn more from racism when I see it than anything else. I just see it as an ignorant part of you. And I'm good at ignoring it and going on to, okay, my next situation. If it ever occurs to me, it's always on. It's never been against the business though, I have to say.
I can honestly say in our 18 years,
we haven't had anybody walk in the door and be like, 2 black girls. If anything, they're impressed.
Yeah.
Walking in the door like, wow, I would have never known.
They'll whisper and say, "Are you the owners?"
Yeah, like,
are you the workers? Right, trying to figure it all out. Like, who's running this?
You do all that here in this office?
How?
Yeah. So you guys are young. Like, I mean, we get questions like that. And I think it's more of their eagerness to understand how'd you do it.
Yeah.
Right. And especially when we say we've been in business for 18 years, they're like, what?
How? And what?
What? Like, yeah. And in this location, like, we haven't jumped around,
So if it's happened to our business, we don't know about it.
We're oblivious.
Yeah. It might have been behind some other closed door, but it's never been in our face where we've had to confront the issue of racism.
I do believe that my opinions, my suggestions have been dissuaded or ignored because I'm black. And that's been in some of the professional settings I've been in, when I worked in the art and culture space, when I worked at Mocha Cleveland, there were certain conversations we would have where I felt like, even though I quote unquote was supposed to represent black culture or the black community, that a lot of times some of the suggestions or things that I would say wouldn't have the kind of bearing that I felt that it should have. I would argue that that's part of the reason why I left Mocha, was because of the fact that I was doing my job. Y'all hired me to help diversify the space. That's what I did. And you can ask anybody that went to Mocha between 2017 and 2019. 90% of them will tell you if they went to a program or whatever, it was because it was one of the programs I helped to curate or I produced and organized myself. Did I get any credit for that? No, not really. There was a situation where a news channel wanted to do a story on everything I've been doing. And at the time, we were in transition. We were about to go free. And so I was basically told, like, maybe now's not the right time. Fast forward like a month later, I come back from vacation. The same news reporters are doing a story on Mocha. Like, they're at Like my first day back from vacation, I'm asking what's going on. It's the same news channel, like, and they're doing a story on diversity. They're doing a story on diversity, and the one person who was hired to help bring diversity to the museum is not featured in the story.
Being a black man, what does that mean to people? And in those certain rooms, you do have where that opinion is not as valued. Some people may say like, "Oh, I want diversity, we want this," and then when you're in that room, they're just like, "Oh no, well, keep thinking about it," or we're not there yet, or we're not ready. And how are you not ready if this is why you brought me here?
Yes and no. Yes, I feel that I have certainly been in rooms and situations where there was this undertone of what I call the little black girling, which I define as being a black woman and having a big voice and a big mind and having much to contribute, but people want to keep you in this box of just this little black girl who's working on this issue or saying this thing. And so I always sort of joke to myself early on to say that, I understand that what people may have thought was, like, oh, this is so cute, this little black girl saving these babies and doing this doula program. But if I was underestimated, I wouldn't have known, nor did I care, because I had a vision. And that was what was important to me, to fulfill that vision and to see it through. And I still get that sort of undertone sometimes with people who want my expertise for free, who think that I just want to talk to them about racial injustice and disparities for the heck of it, I suppose. But what I have learned to do over the years is take some of that advocacy that I have in me for others and use it for myself to say, no, you can little black girl me if you like, but you'll regret it, because I do have a ton of passion and I know what I'm talking about, and I'm more of an expert in being black and being a black woman than most of the people that I work with in this sector who are non-black, who are not women. And so I hold that truth to myself and to everything that I put my touch on.
I think that my my opinion and positions are dismissed and undervalued all the time, but I'm not easily distracted by that. I sort of go into my business, and I would argue me and my business partner, who's a black male, have spent our entire lives like being dismissed and undervalued or called hippies or radicals or, and we're kind of motivated by those labels. And we're also willing to not only critique those labels that are applied to us, but to consider them realistically. I used to be very offended by being called a radical because I don't think that a lot of what I'm saying is radical. It just feels like what it is. So I used to dismiss the idea that like, you're a radical. But then I had to like kind of do more research on like what it means to be radical or what a radical idea is. And once I was able to acknowledge and accept that, it was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I am a radical, but that doesn't make what I'm striving for less valuable, right? And I don't have to kind of contort myself or make myself small because it may make other people uncomfortable or may challenge people, because that's actually what our business thrives on, right? Is the ability to challenge, the ability to provoke, the ability to push, the idea of going beyond, to imagine, right? Because I think that what we're really striving to do in some ways is to, if you're looking for change, it is in direct conflict with the status quo.
While so many points hit home for me, reflecting on my own personal experiences there, I recall, graduating from college. And even though I had graduated cum laude and had awards and corporate experience, I still was having a hard time finding a job. And my mentors actually suggested that I shorten my name to Shar, which, it worked at the time. But that's another story. Fast forward to today, I have built my business and my reputation as Chardonnay. But like Danielle, I still have had to wonder if I'm charging enough. I found that I haven't been charging enough. And then it's even funnier when you realize you're not charging enough, and clients are astonished when you go to raise the price. I've also found myself in conference rooms having to, tiptoe around my opinion, or, try to keep things politically correct. But the reality is, the truth is not nice. The truth is never comfortable, but that's not what they're usually ready to hear.
And the thing is, are they ready to hear the real truth? Because what we define as the truth differs for other people. Mm-hmm. And, right now we have a bunch of companies saying that Black lives do matter to them. And we're in 2020, and companies are now having the voice to say that with no fear. So let's hear what our guests have to say.
The institutions that currently provide support to entrepreneurs, I think it's a mixed bag. You have some organizations that are very well intentioned, but they don't have enough capacity, right? So they have one staff person or two staff people that are the receptionist, they're the marketing person, they're providing technical assistance. And so that entrepreneur is not getting the high level, high quality, high touch experience that they really need in order for them to thrive. Then I think on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have organizations that have lots of money and lots of resources, but no cultural competency to be dealing with entrepreneurs, especially Black and Latinx folks, because they haven't walked in our shoes. They don't understand the struggle. They don't understand the other things that we balance. When we talk about, I think in this moment right now, what's happening in 2020, Black people don't just have to live in what's happening in politics and what's happening in society around us. We're still dealing with our own personal health issues. We're dealing with the issues of our family. And we bring those things to the table when we go into organizations looking for assistance in our businesses. And when you don't have people that understand the dynamic of needing to know, how is Danielle doing as a person today, before I talk to her about what I need her to try and endeavor as a business owner, I think you end up having a mismatch. And so unfortunately, I don't think that we have enough organizations who are serving us in the way that we need to be served. And I think that bears out when you look at statistics. 94% of all businesses owned by African Americans are solo entrepreneurs and have no employees. We're not currently building enterprises. When you talk about business, that means you're paying a payroll to somebody besides yourself, in my opinion. And if we really have all these organizations that are supposed to be helping business owners, and we're not improving the number of Black businesses that have employees, something's got to change.
Black people and Black businesses are not a monolith, right? So Third Space Action Lab's experience could be very different from the next business's experience. And it can be different for a lot of reasons. It could be different because one business is wanting or demanding more than the next business. The truth is, some of us are just happy to be in the room, where our grandparents, how does it go? Where our ancestors' wildest dreams, sort of stuff. And I think that's true a little bit. I want to believe that my ancestors wanted more than what we're having now. And some people would say that I am ungrateful and I just need to be quiet and just, and we experienced that very much when we left our good paying, good benefited, nonprofit job. And we're critiquing the system that we had come from, and frankly, critiquing the organization that we had come from. I had a lot of people across the board, Black, white, young, old, saying like, Evelyn, I don't understand what you're so upset about. I don't understand, like, what more do you want? And I'm like, so much more, so much more. Some of those institutions have done things that are kind of helpful. Learning the game is learning the game, period. But it doesn't mean you have to like the game or like the rules, or, so I don't get too caught up in the, the game or the player, like whatever. Like, I think this whole thing should get blown up, but I know that when you blow things up, like there's major consequences of that, right? So there's a lot of institutions in Cleveland, especially, that are offering services to businesses that are not helpful at all because they don't understand the plight that Black businesses face today, period. And I think that that's because those institutions and the people in those institutions lack proximity to the problems that Black people are trying to navigate. And I think that there are very few forces and influencers that are forcing those institutions and those people to get more proximity.
I've been in nonprofit for 20 years in Cleveland, and we're very foundation and grant driven. And I'm sure that there are, in the nonprofit world, I'm sure it can really correlate to the for-profit world because a business is a business. But my experience has been when people are offering you money, it's like you baking a cake. You say like, hey, I'm reaching out to y'all because I'm ready to bake a cake. And they say, okay, bet you can apply for this grant for the flour only. You're not allowed to use any of this grant money to pay for frosting. You're not allowed to use any of this grant money to pay for eggs. You're not allowed to use any of this grant money for the time it takes to be able to make the cake. I'm only covering the flour. And because I'm only covering the flour, I want to know how that flour is being grained. I want to know where you're picking the meal, like what meal you're getting it from. I need a 5-page essay. I need a report on how each gram of flour is going to be allocated. You know what I'm saying? They will only micromanage the one little part they want to cherry pick out to say, look at me, clap for me. I gave my money to the baker only for the flour. You know what I'm saying? And so I think when it really comes to getting receiving capital, receiving, grants, receiving funds to be able to do the things that you do, we really need unrestricted dollars. You know what I'm saying? Just like, don't ask me no questions. If you trust what I'm able to do, let me do my work. Let me figure out how to get to A to Z. Don't micromanage B, F, G. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't do that. Give me the money, give me the latitude to be able to do what I want to do, how I want to do it.
Institutions who are positioned to offer services to Black businesses, I think sometimes they can help and they can hinder at the same time because they may not know just being able to grow up in certain situations what is needed. And sometimes that interest truly isn't there to really connect with the owner, really learning their story, as opposed to saying like, okay, you need to do this because this worked for this person. Everything is not sort of like this cookie cutter approach. Everything has to be, and I get sometimes these institutions want us to be able to streamline things and say, we offer this, we offer that, and those are important, but you have to remember that, financial literacy may be important. Social media content may be important, but being able to learn the market. How do you price certain things? How do you approach communities that you may not have grown up in? Like, these are things that you have to really think about when you're helping Black businesses. So that way you don't sort of like keep them here and say like, okay, we've surrounded them with this suite of programs, but how you begin to move them here to where they're truly elevating based on their lane and not the institution's lane.
They don't help or necessarily hurt the businesses unless we look at it from a lens of, if this institution is receiving a specific pot of money that is specific to helping Black businesses, and then they're not doing that, it definitely is a hindrance. I think that what we have to understand is that we've been middlemanned enough, and we don't need an overseer, AKA a third party, to dictate or hand us resources that we are very capable of taking care of ourselves. And we don't get the same treatment when it comes to receiving resources. We have to jump through 3 hoops and 3 rings of fire to maybe have access to capital that is accessible to white businesses who equally do a bad job of record keeping and making good on the money and all of these things. But I tend to stray away from comparing us to white businesses or white people or anything like that. We should be focused on us, our own empowerment, and us pushing ourselves forward and stop making a comparison to people or non-Black people, because who's to say that our expertise and what we have to give is not greater? I would say that we are limiting ourselves by comparing ourselves to how others are treated, or, you know, we should be demanding excellence. We should be demanding that that money doesn't go through an overseer or a third party, that it comes directly to us.
I think they will ever understand what we need as a Black business. I can't say every white person is the devil, so if it's their way of giving back, great, you owe us. Yeah, go ahead. Offer us every grant that's possible. You know, they've made it in every way and helped each other in every way. And now I think it's time for Black businesses to come up. We've helped build their businesses for years. And it's our turn. Yeah. So if a white person is behind it, I think it's there something in their in the back of their mind telling them, yeah, we've been treating them like crap for years. It's time for us to do our part. And I can only say that if it's not more Black businesses at the top being run by Black business, it's our fault.
Institutions now popping up with these diversity departments and diversity and inclusion chairs and all of this. You know, I kind of take the sentiment of fashion designer Jerry Lorenzo, who said, like, do the actual work before you just start a diversity and inclusion department. Feel. Do you feel anything? Do you, like, when you see Black people getting killed, getting gunned down, or being ignored or shunned, do you feel anything? Or is this just a knee-jerk reaction? You know, one of the things I saw recently on Twitter was like Black Lives Matter is becoming gentrified. Like, is this just a trend for you guys to hop on? Or do you actually mean it? Have you done the work? And the other thing about it is, when I was in that position at Mocha and I saw other community engagement people, which really community engagement is the same thing as diversity and inclusion, I was the only Black in that position. It was like, I think it was one other Black woman, but pretty much 90% of the other people in that position were white women. So is that really reflective of the community that we live in, that we serve? I think you have to do the work. I think you have to actually be in the community. I think you have to have conversations with the community to find out their perspective. And I think you need to hire from that community in order for it to be real. Outside of that, it's a bunch of bullshit to me. Like, it's like, you forgive us now? There was a sweatshirt that Joe Freshgoods put out. It was an old school Gucci hoodie, and he wrote on it, we'll just call it diversity and inclusion. They'll forget about it. That's what's happening in a lot of areas. Now, at the same time, some organizations are legitimate with that because they're actually in the communities. They're actually having conversation, and the type of people that they're hiring are reflective or are people who actually do the work. So I'm not going to say that they're all like that, but there are organizations like that.
Have I reached out to institutions or businesses that say that they do ABC for me to find out that they don't in fact do ABC? And in fact, I actually don't know what they do, but they may attract funding to do what they claim to do, but then that ends up not being the case? Absolutely. I think that that is the truth for the vast majority of a lot of the institutions in Cleveland and Cuyahoga County, is that they're extremely ineffective, and nobody is holding them accountable. Because if they were effective, then we would not see the type of statistics that we do.
I want institutions and the people in institutions to be more proximate to Black businesses. I want them to receive products and services from Black businesses. I want them to offer helpful critiques when that kind of need arises. I want them to be consumers of Black businesses so that they actually have experience. I want them to spend time in the neighborhoods where Black businesses are located, to understand some of the challenges to being a Black business in a Black neighborhood. And then conversely, if a Black business is not in a Black neighborhood, like, what does that mean for a business? What challenges do they experience? I want them to stop studying the same thing and stop arriving at the same conclusion, so they stop applying the same strategies and tactics that don't work. You know, it feels like often a lot of putting lipstick on a pig, still a pig. I want them to overall see Black businesses and the potential of Black businesses like they see the potential of white businesses, which is a tall ask because there's so much underneath that's very important and not easy to get to. And ultimately, I want them to move resources, money, technical assistance, space, whether it's meeting space or whatever, more equitably to Black businesses. I want them to make space for more Black leadership in business. There are very, very successful Black business owners and Black business endeavors. And we don't often get those availed to us. And I want them to overall intrinsically just see value in Black stuff, right? Black business, Black,
Some of the institutions that I've reached out for some of my social sort of projects have been Neighborhood Connections, Salvation Army. So these are different places that are community based and I knew would truly understand my story. And so that is the reason why I reached out to them, because they would understand, okay, this is Dante, this is where he grew up, this is what he's done so far, and this is what he's trying to do now. Cleveland Foundation has sort of put together this COVID-19, Greater Cleveland COVID-19 Rapid Response Fund, and we approached them for the Mask for Community, and they were all on that. So I think just during this time of COVID-19, institutions and foundations have really been able to sort of sit back and sort of reset themselves a little bit to knock down some of those barriers that have been in place. Those processes were virtually eliminated to really do rapid response funding. And so when people come and say, okay, we need this money now, it's not about, okay, can we get this 3 months later because we have to go through a process. This is needed now. We see that we can do that. And so now it's how do we continue to do that and really be proactive versus always being responsive to or reactive to people who are in need now.
I've only reached out to people who look like me because that's where I feel safest right now. And I call them my great white hopes. So white people that I've known and that have shown and proved over many years to be invested in divesting from white supremacy in the ways that they can. You got to realize white people are only going to be as woke as they can be. You know what I'm saying? They can use all the right language. They can do some of the right things. But once again, racism is a virus that has to be managed. And sometimes they manage to fuck it up. You know what I'm saying? And so it's extending grace as well in that reaching out. And so not yet, but mostly people who look like me, and it's always been a fruitful and helpful experience.
I think I've always been very fortunate and lucky to be constantly building relationships with people first, and institutions separately. And I'm still very much wrestling with that. People and institutions and like, you know, what's the chicken and what's the egg sort of. So a lot of the help that I've received or the help that I've been offered has come from other people. That's not to say that I haven't reached out to institutions for help. I have. And some of it's been okay. And some of it's just been a victim of my critique because I get to experience, I've had the fortune of experiencing things from multiple sides. So a lot of the institutions that I have reached out to for help, I used to be a funder of theirs, as an example. You know, when I was in philanthropy, I was their grant maker or something like that. And so I was able to see the difference between like what they write in a grant report or a grant proposal about what they do. And then on the other side, I've been able to experience like what they do. And I'm like, you know, something is not right here.
When you are in alignment and when things are aligned in the way that they need to be, you don't have to do all of this work, right? So I think our issue a lot of times is that we want to force things to happen and we want to force people to hear us and we want to force these changes instead of allowing things to flow. We are supposed to take the path of least resistance. But our socialization says that, no, you got to go hard and you got to fight and you got to keep going and you got to keep doing it until you die. Stress is, whether or not this is on paper, stress is the number one killer because it suppresses your immune system, which makes you more susceptible to all of these illnesses and things. And so we don't realize that when we are trying to work with people who don't want to work with us, that is stressful. And you are waking up with high blood pressure. You're not eating right. You aren't getting proper rest. All of these things that impact your health. For me, I chose not to do that. So a lot of the institutions that we end up working with have come to us. And if I think that it's a good fit, then we'll work together. If I don't think that it's a good fit, we won't work together. And I'm not going to feel a way about that. And hopefully you won't either. And if you do, you'll be okay. Because I don't believe in forcing anything. And it won't work well if you do.
The way that we've interacted with a lot of institutions is experimental, right? Like whatever help is going to be afforded is almost not that important, right? We want to know the process. We want to know how the people interact. We want to know the biases that they bring. We want to know the racial equity lens that they apply or not, right? Like those sorts of things.
I think the most common thing we heard from the entrepreneurs here is that they want these organizations to be more immersed in the communities they serve.
Yeah, and you know, I'd love to see more stories or success stories actually about these institutions. Like what worked for them. Let's hear about what you've done for communities that you said you're going to help. And also, I'd love to see, more importantly, how they failed. Yeah. So when you fail, how did you address that failure? Did you let people know that your campaign failed? And also, finally, if you're saying you're helping the community, have you been there? How many of you actually gone to that community physically and talked to people there and found out what they need? They might just not need a road. They may need more than a road on the Virginia corridor, and that's what to say, but they may need more, and we want to see you do that. And that's an elephant in the room that we need to discuss.
Absolutely. It's long overdue for leaders like you and me and leaders like those of you that are watching to start holding these organizations accountable. So I bet you guys got some comments after this one. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for part 2, episode 1, same time next Sunday. Thanks for watching. This is
Unspoken.
Unspoken.
So I do think that if we were to organize ourselves, we could replicate what we saw in the past. It does take for us to trust each other. And I think that, we have been taught not to trust each other.
I think it is why we can go into a Black restaurant and have one bad experience and swear that we're never, ever, ever going to go again. And we're going to tell everybody we know to never, ever, ever go again. And we can go into a white restaurant and be treated like trash and to have our money undervalued, like it ain't green like everybody else's, and say, well, but the food was great, and the ambiance was beautiful. And I'm going to give them another chance.
The way white supremacy works, white people don't even have to be in a room or the community. We are internalizing this. It's in our DNA, and we have to regurgitate all of that.